Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? I am Dr. Gregory A. Salters, your law enforcement executive and success and leadership coach. Glad that you all could join us for this presentation tonight when we're talking about various processes and how we get from where we are in life to where we'd like to be. Also, how we could get our organization from where they are to where they desire to be with their vision and mission statement. We've been going along this path of getting into law enforcement. What type of law enforcement officers are we looking for? We talked about what to do before the application. We've talked about that process. We've talked about the application. What I'd like to talk about with you tonight is a very interesting subject. This is the subject of the interview. And it is interesting to me because it is, when you talk to people about the interview, you get all types of answer as what is the purpose of the interview. You have all types of individuals trying to decide what should they wear to the interview. You also have multi-generational issues with interviews and what you should wear. I come from the generation where we had the book Dress for Success. I am a graduate of the Florida A&M University School of Business and Industry, where we had to dress for success. We had our forums, we had our close-ups. I'm also a Dr. Sybil Mobley baby, and I am behind my dad, who was Dr. Sybil Mobley in Dr. Sybil Mobley's first economic class up at Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. When we came through school, we understood the power of dress. We understood the power of the colors that you wore. We understood the powers of everything that goes along and what you're dealing with to be successful. When you're trying to be successful, many times they tell you to look at individuals who you believe to be successful and begin to model that. That is good to a certain extent, but no matter what, you must remain as an individual. Be yourself, go out and make an impact. So when we're talking about an interview, what is the purpose of an interview? And you all can feel free to put in your questions, your comments. We will be adding those. I will be answering those as they come up. So therefore, we can kind of keep this moving and keep it energetic. And I want to be able to provide you with some information that you can use immediately. One, what is the purpose of an interview? Sometimes people say it's for the organization to get to know you. Sometimes some people say it's for you to just go over and express yourself. Sometimes people look at it as a way of confirming the information that you have in the written document. And some individuals, quite honestly, say that it is a waste of time. One of the things you look at the interview process, and particularly in law enforcement, well, we'll talk about it in a law enforcement context, the skills and the theories and the philosophy behind what I'm teaching you about the interview applies in all interviews that you ever go to. And that could even be when you're talking to someone with a relationship issue, whether you're talking to someone about a job issue, if you're talking to somebody that's a realtor, you're basically going through an interview process. And interviewing is so significant in law enforcement to where we even have classes that you may attend. Investigative techniques, interview techniques, so you could go there and it's a class. And it can be a week-long class that's teaching you interview techniques, how you interview, what nonverbal cues do you watch for, what do the nonverbal cues state, how do you respond to them. Also, when I'm in John C. Maxwell, we have the DISC assessments where we can perform the DISC assessments. I've done that for some of my clients where we perform a DISC so they can learn how they communicate. So you also have all types of impact reports that we do. You can find out your sales impact and so on and so forth. So you can kind of see what type of communicator you are, because there are various different styles and personalities of communication. And once you truly understand that, it really helps you connect. And then you're able to go to the next level. Thank you, Brother Jordan. Glad to see that you're with us. Another brother that's working in the university system up in Tallahassee. Glad to have you with us again tonight, Brother Jordan, Alex Jordan. But when you're talking about these interviews, one thing that I want us to realize, and even in this virtual environment, this also comes to play. I'm sure some of you all have seen some of the things that have happened dealing with virtual interviews where individuals may have walked in the background, distractions may have happened in the background, or they may or may not have had on all of their proper clothing when they have gone through these interviews. So what we're talking about is whether your interview is virtual or actual. The first thing you must do is be on time to the interview. And remember, on time is late, so be early. That allows for any contingencies you may have. It allows for you, if you're driving to the interview, it allows for you to be able to relax and give your best self once you get there. If it is virtual, make sure you get on, make sure all of your equipment is working, make sure your cameras are working, so that therefore that does not add to your stress of the interview. We need you to be as relaxed as possible. Nothing wrong with being nervous. Nervous means that the interview means something to you. If you ever go into something and you are not nervous, that means that did not mean something to you. You have to channel that nervous energy into positive energy. So now that we have gotten there and we're on time and you check in with the individuals that you're supposed to check in with, I forgot. Before we're on time, we need to make sure we are dressed appropriately. As I told you, the dress for success. When you are dressing, it is always best to be conservative, particularly when you're dealing in law enforcement, this career field, and a lot of the other ones. Be conservative, because what you're trying to do is at least connect with the interviewees, the panelists, and you don't want to wear anything that may create a hurdle for them to get over. Because just as tonight, if I were presenting to you all, I could be presenting tonight and be in a t-shirt. I could also have no shirt on or anything and still be presenting this information, but you would have to get over my attire prior to you listening to and receiving the information that I am going to present to you. So do not create your own hurdles when you're going into an interview. So guys, if you have a suit, always go dark suit, blue, black, suits that color, a light colored shirt, a white, soft blue, whichever, and a tie. And what you're doing now is you're presenting yourself forward. Ladies, same type of color. You're going to be in a dark colored suit, whether it's pantsuit, skirt, whichever you're most comfortable with, light colored blouse, and then something nice there. Be conservative when you're out doing your interviews, because we want to make sure, yes, Ms. Koch, she's with us. She has an outstanding radio program. If you ever heard her over on Streaming Hub, First Impressions. One thing about first impressions is you only have one opportunity to make a first impression. Once you make that first impression, that is it. And you want your first impression to be a valuable, lasting impression. So now that we have our dress together, and also shoes, make sure when you have your shoes, it's good to have dark shoes on. We're being conservative. You can wear some other things if you so wish, but a dark shoe, and make sure it is clean and preferably polished, because people tend to watch that. With our hands, make sure your hands are clean. You go in there, we have all this COVID stuff. Make sure you've sanitized and your hands are together. We're following protocols. But now what you have done, you have been on time. You have dressed appropriately. And one thing that you have done, and I often ask people, how did you prepare for this interview? Did you research the company? Do you at least know a little bit about them? If it is a law enforcement agency, do you at least know their staffing, whether it is sworn staffing, civilian staffing? What do you know about them? Do they have various units that they have? Do they have specialty units? Have you Googled them? And I like telling people the things that we talk about are Googleable. So have you Googled the organization to find out what key issues they're having or what key things they are facing? Because when you know that, then you can better be prepared for the interview and show that you at least care about the interview. Also, what things have you done prior to the interview? Have you done any ride-alongs? We mentioned that in one of our previous videos. Do the ride-alongs. Talk to the people that work for the organization, because that's going to give you fuel for your interview. I see the dress for success, and I see my mentee, Ashton Lashane. Also, make sure you address not being alarmed or worried when the viewer is late. Happened to me more than once. Interviewer was about 20 minutes late. The interview before mine ran over. Very good point, Ashton. When you're doing your interview, they're interviewing you. You're trying to get the job, not them. As long as you're on time, do not let that fluster you, whatever they do. You smile, you go with the flow, and you let them know who you are. Very good point, Ashton. And then when we look at the other things that we have going on It is very good that we're here. We're dealing with the interview. You've researched, and now you're going to go in. And we understand what is the ultimate purpose of an interview. The ultimate purpose of an interview. Are you ready? This is the game changer. This is why people that I work with have that mindset that changes. And this is why all we do is win. The mindset when you're going into the interview, and I see that Nadia Assad is with us tonight, and I see the others, see DJ. The thing that you're doing, even when you're on panels and you're doing all these type things, what you're trying to do is to show the audience why they should hire you, vote for you instead of anybody else. That is the sole purpose of the interview. If you are going into an interview and you are not going in with the sole purpose of showing them why they should hire you instead of anybody else, you're wasting your time and the interviewer's time. That is what it is. You are trying to show them why they should hire you instead of anyone else. A question I often get from individuals is, how many vacancies do we have? And my retort to that is, how many vacancies do you need? When I applied, all I need to know is that you have one vacancy and I'm claiming that one. Otherwise, I'm not going to apply. So once you have that mindset going forward, that your job is to show them why they should hire you instead of anybody else, now you're in a different mind space. And one of the things I've done with some of the clients that I have them write their autobiography. And we go through it, and I will look at their autobiography, and then I will beat them in a job interview using their own autobiography just by the way that I present it. So don't let somebody beat you with your own autobiography. You have lived it. So now we have to be able to discuss that autobiography. Because now when you go into an interview, and this is the same for promotional processes, when you go into for an interview, human resources and the panelists already have the factors that they're going to be grading you on. Many times these factors are such things as leadership, how you operate under stress, decisiveness. Sometimes they go into the experiences that you've had, how you handle things. And a job interview is kind of like your algebra problems. If you remember those from, depending on which kind of class you were in, I wasn't in the honors class, so I didn't get algebra until later in my educational experience. How you doing, Aunt Didi? Laverne, you doing okay? Glad that you could join us. And I know cousin is going to be joining us. Byron is also running for office up there in the Panhandle. I'm glad we have everybody on here because we're going to be sharing this information, and this is what we need to be doing. So now when you're dealing with these interviews and you're figuring out what we do, how we move forward, let's look at it. Now, when you are interviewing, what are some of the things that you have in your background that show that you have leadership skills? What in your background shows that you are a thinker? What in your background shows that you can process things? And as I was talking about algebra, if you remember in algebra, the interview is just like algebra. The teacher wasn't really so concerned with your answer. They were more concerned with your work product. How did you get to the answer? So in an interview, there is not going to be a right or wrong answer. The interviewers are judging how you answered the question. What is your thought process? How did you come up with that answer? Because in law enforcement, many jobs, you come across things that you've never come across before. We need to make sure that you can think your way through the process. We need thinkers. So now, how did you actually think about to come up with that determination? So now you start looking at it. What am I showing my leadership skills? How am I showing that I think? How am I showing that I operate under stress? How do I deal with some scenarios that they're going to give me? How do I even talk about myself? Let's start with the first thing, talking about yourself. When they open up and ask you, tell me about yourself, what do you think that they're really asking you to do? What they're asking you to do is tell me the important things about you that would make me want to hire you instead of anyone else. So therefore, don't start talking about things that are irrelevant to the job. What I often tell people to do in this particular situation is to think about somebody outstanding. And this is how you prepare for your interview. Think about the outstanding. If it's a law enforcement officer, think about an outstanding officer that you know, and think about what they do that makes you believe that they are outstanding. You may even want to Google the police officer of the year for the agency that you are applying for. See what he or she did to become officer of the year. Look at their backgrounds and try to see, okay, great, those individuals are really doing things. You also Google and say, what is an outstanding police officer? We covered that in one of the other videos where we talked about an outstanding police officer. You can look back at that video. You can also check out the YouTube channel and see what we're talking about, because we're really trying to help people be successful in whatever it is. Because remember, success is options. So now once you get out there and you have decided and defined what it is as an outstanding officer, you need to go back into your background, and depending on how old you are and where you are in your career will determine how far back you go and how in depth you go with that background issue. If you're just out of college and you did some things like, for instance, in law enforcement, there's some things that are going on out there that that we're dealing with. How do we bring communities together? The police department engagement. You're also talking about leadership. So if you're out of college and you played high school football, you were a cheerleader or anything like that, do you think that might give you some points when you really expound on that in your interview? One, you look at it and say, okay, I was a cheerleader. We dealt with a lot of team building. We dealt with a lot of spirit. It didn't really matter how the game was going. It was our job to keep things moving forward. So you did that. So now as a police officer, regardless of what's going on in the community, regardless of what's going on in social media, you know how to handle adversity, keeping everybody upbeat and keeping everybody level so that we do not lose control and we don't have a peaceful protest turn into a riot or something else. That is a useful skill. But if you don't tell me that and sell me that in the interview, I don't know it, and it's in your background. Because remember, if you do not state it in the interview, I cannot rate you on it. So you must tell me about it. So now you look at it, you're going through, and you may have been applying for a job in law enforcement. And let's suppose you were on another job. And let's say that you started entry level and you were promoted to a supervisor and then promoted to an area manager in sales. So do you just say, I was promoted and I was promoted again, and then I supervised the whole area in sales? Or would you say that through your hard work and dedication, you earned a promotion to supervisor? And once you were able to go over there and duplicate your efforts and everybody in your team started producing more and you were a leading team, you earned another promotion to area supervisor, to where you were able to help more people carry on the organization and carry on the sales? Do you see where I could have beat you with your own background just by talking about what you did? You were not given a promotion, you earned a promotion. There is a big difference between that. Do you also see where I talked about your leadership skills and how you worked with your team and helped them go to the next level? These are the things that you're going to need to be able to bring out in your interview. If you do not bring them out in your interview, then you're not going to be rated the highest that you could, and you're going to be leaving points on the table. Because many times when you take an interview in an interview panel, you're going to be graded, you're going to have number scores. And for instance, on a leadership standpoint, you have some individuals that I've had that have come out of the military and they have been platoon leaders, and they'll come out and they'll say, I was a platoon leader. And they will leave it off as that, and they will assume that individuals listening will understand what it goes into being a platoon leader, how many individuals there are in the platoon, and what all you have. Do not leave it up to other individuals' imagination. You might say, as a platoon leader, you were in charge of X number of individuals. You had to help them, many of them transitioning into the military, what they were doing, showing them how to navigate it. You were building together teams, coming together, completing projects. Talk about how you may have had to help someone, they were going through some rough times, because that's what a leader does. It's always about the other person. It's not about us. So did you really talk to me about that when you were talking about your leadership skills, or you left that out? The other thing that you talk about is stress. And this is a very interesting one. Sometimes in law enforcement, we want to know, what type of stressful situations have you been in? So now when you've been in these stressful situations, it wasn't that you were in the situation, it was how did you handle it? Because now some individuals may be involved in a stressful situation. Some of those that are interesting to me is I've sat on numerous panels or individuals that have been in law enforcement or that have been in the military. There's some things that we have been in that would be tremendously stressful to other individuals. We tend to downplay it. And so therefore you're like, wow, so you were in a shootout, 4 individuals were shot, you did administered the blood clot that stopped the wounds and saved this guy's life while bullets were still flying over your head. I've had individuals come in and say it just as matter of factly as that, not that exact scenario, but something very similar and that's stressful. And they look at it and say, we had the proper training. So I'm glad that we had the training. We were able to deal with the situation, and everybody, we did the best that we could. Where other people would come in and their most stressful situation would be when they were at a stoplight and somebody blew the horn at them consistently. But now, while we can obviously tell that there's different levels of stress, in the interview, it is based on how the 2 individuals explain those situations and what they did and how they handled it. Because it's not the what you did, it's how did you do it. It's not what happened to you, it's how did you respond to it in this interview situation. And remember, when you are responding, you're thinking about it. There are dimensions. If you've ever taken some interviews, you can ask what dimensions are being graded. You can also ask for more information on it. And if not, you can Google and you can see there are about 5 or 6 dimensions that are going to always be looked at. Your leadership skills, your decision-making skills, problem-solving skills, stress management, those type things are going to always be in your interviews. And this is the same thing when you go for promotional exams to the rank of sergeant, lieutenant, captain. And the higher you go, it becomes a little bit more administrative in how you deal with things. So now, when I ask individuals that wish to work with me, I ask them, I say, write your autobiography, because a lot of times what I want to do is have things that have happened in your background come up to the forefront. Because if you've written them down, things that we've done in our past, that we've done them and we've kind of forgotten about them. Imagine going back and writing your autobiography from, let's say, high school, with all of the things that you've done that would make you an outstanding law enforcement officer. So you'll talk about your sports, you talk about your leadership skills. You may have even forgotten about some things you've done. You'll talk about band. You'll talk about all of your experiences in FBLA. You'll talk about things that you did in college, the various organizations you were in. I was in Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and I still am a diehard member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So what did you do within those organizations that develop leadership skills? What did you do in those organizations that would help you be an ideal law enforcement in today's climate? Did you learn how to deal with diverse populations? Did you learn how to be culturally sensitive and you're culturally competent? You understand that there are different cultures, and different doesn't mean better or worse. It simply means different. And you have to be able to understand that and bring the whole community together, because as Nadia states, together we can. We have to bring our whole communities together. DJ, good seeing you. See others, or have any other comments that we have, any questions that anybody wants answered, just please let me know. You can just type them into chat. And now, when you're also thinking about this interview in law enforcement, sometimes you're given scenarios in your interviews. In the scenarios, you have 2 different types. If you are a sworn law enforcement officer, you will not, if you're not a sworn law enforcement officer, we obviously wouldn't expect for you to answer the questions as a seasoned sworn law enforcement officer. So don't even think that that's what we're expecting you to do. So from 2 different standpoints, when you're a sworn law enforcement officer, we're expecting you to have experience and to be able to go a little bit more in depth with your answer and your thought process. So now remember, you'll be competing against other sworn law enforcement officers. If you aren't sworn law enforcement, we would look at some of the things and see how your thought process works. Are you familiar with what's going on? Have you read enough? Have you talked to some law enforcement officers? For instance, if you're in the middle of the street and on the left side of the street, a house is burning down, and on the right side of the street, someone has a gun pointed at another person's head, which issue do you deal with first? In law enforcement, we're always dealing with the preservation of life first. So you're always going to go towards the preservation of life instead of property. So now when you do that and you explain that, you're going to get more points than someone that's going to put out a fire on a vacant building. So therefore, we have to think about these kind of things, go through various scenarios, talk with people with scenarios, watch the news stories that are out there and see what would you have done? How would you have done it? Talk to other individuals, because this is what's going to come out in the interview. So you're dealing with the interview. What are you dealing with? How are you dealing with it? How are you dressed? How are you explaining the things? And are you really addressing those things that the interview panelists are looking for? We're dealing with those things, because when you're going in there to that interview and you aren't going in with the attitude as to you're going to show us why we should hire you instead of anybody else, you're wasting your time and theirs. So one of the things I want you all to remember when we're getting ready to do our interviews and go for our interviews, one, research the organization, Google it, talk to individuals that are in there. You can also pull up their budget. I love for individuals to do that analysis. Pull up the budget. Pull up the crime statistics for that particular area so that you know what type of crimes they're having. Know how their organization is staffed, because that's also going to help you understand the organization, help you have a little bit more in your fuel tank when you're answering questions coming from the panelists. You'll be able to have a more informed answer. So now we're looking at, we're getting prepared for the interview. So now when you get there, you're going to make sure you're dressed properly at the house, because the interview starts when you're leaving your house. A true story. I was in front of the police department, and there was a gentleman that sped up into the station, literally came in there on about 2 wheels, driving very fast, music blaring, got out of his car, came on up in there. I saw him. I went into the interview, and he came into the interview about an hour. He was like, it was one person before him and then the other one. He came in, he sat down, and he saw me. What do you think happened? At that particular time, his heart went to his stomach. So I doubt that he performed as well as he would have if he would have driven into the station sensibly and had enough time to relax himself and be ready to present himself professionally. Many times you don't understand it. Once you leave that house, that is when that interview begins. So now that you're in the interview, make sure that if it is a virtual interview, you're looking straight, you've checked your camera, you have your camera angles there, your microphone is on. Make sure all of those things are working and proper so that that does not become another distraction. If you're doing the interview in person, make sure you've gotten there. Make sure you're looking good when you get out of the car. Check your mirror. You know, you don't want to have any salad in between your teeth, because that would be tremendously distracting. Also, make sure that you've turned your phone on to silent so that that doesn't ring or cause another distraction for you, because once that distraction happens, it takes you off of your game. So you don't need any other distractions. And now if it is in place and you're doing an actual interview, make sure that when individuals ask the question, it may be one individual that asked the question, but make sure you begin answering, looking at that individual, but you also look and make eye contact at the other individuals. Why? Because you're trying to connect with each one of them. You're trying to connect. So the more you connect, the better they feel with you. And psychologically, they will probably be more inclined to give you a higher score. So also when you're talking about your background and you're talking about the different things that you've been experienced in, what you're doing is putting out so many things that hopefully somebody on the panel can relate to and gives you that nod. You're like, wow, I have made that connection, because leadership is influence. And what you're trying to do is gain some influence with them based on your background. For instance, if you start talking about your background, and let's suppose you played lacrosse, you don't know who on the panel may or may not have played lacrosse or likes lacrosse. That could have been something that happens. If you're in similar organizations, if you were from similar places, I know when I came through with my interview, I'd gotten to my background investigations, and I came back. We had 2 different background investigators because I had to do a follow-up. And when I came back for the second one, I was talking to the gentleman, and he stated, "Oh, you're from Connecticut. You're from Wheaton, Maryland." I said, "Yes, I attended Connecticut Park Elementary." He said, "Wow, I did too." There was like a 10 to 15 year gap between us attending the elementary school in Wheaton, Maryland, and I'm now working in law enforcement in South Florida. But here I am in law enforcement now. I don't know whether that was a deciding factor, but that was a connection that we had to the same school based on our conversation. So when you're talking, and this goes even beyond the interview, anytime you're talking with individuals, you're trying to make connections with them and trying to connect so that you can have the influence to move things forward. So once again, when we're doing our interview, the reason for the interview is for you to go in and show them why they should hire you instead of anyone else. It doesn't matter how many openings or vacancies they have. All you need is one. The next thing that you want to do is prepare for your interview. You want to talk to individuals. You want to Google the organization. You can look at their budget reports. You can look at their financial statements, their business plans to find out about them. Then you want to get dressed for your interview, because when you dress well, you feel well, then you go in strong. So that's dark suit, light shirt, and you can have a dark tie. You go in there. I recommend that. It's kind of like saying sir and ma'am. That is very respectful. So therefore, we don't want to create any issues. You go in, and this is how we're going. Once you're in there, make sure you greet everyone. At least say thank you for giving them the time, so on and so forth. And we go in. Then when they ask you to talk about yourself based on what you believe to be an outstanding officer based on your research, and show that you have those qualities of an outstanding officer. When you're answering those scenarios, then you can flip back to the things I asked you to write about in your autobiography. So if you talk about leadership and they say, tell me about leadership, and you say, wow, leadership is something that's needed in all organizations, because leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Kind of like in law enforcement, we have to connect to the community, because when we connect with the community, we have influence. And once we have influence, we can kind of lead the city forward. And then you can say this is very similar to when I played football in high school. We had things we had to get done. And because I had connected with all our football players that came from everywhere, we had some that were very wealthy. We had some that were homeless. All of us were on the team together. We put aside all of those differences because we wanted to come together as a team, which is what we need to do as a community. And we helped each other. So now do you see where I talked about your leadership and helping in high school with what we're doing right now in law enforcement? So therefore, that will help increase your score in leadership, as opposed to some other people saying, yes, when I was in high school, I played football and I was a leader. Okay, thank you. And so now that we've come in through it and we're talking about all these things and giving the examples, then at the end of the interview, when they ask you, is there anything else that you would like to say? This is the time that you would ask for the job and thank them for what it is that you're doing. You would say, thank you, I greatly appreciate. And this is just a suggestion. You can paraphrase anything that I want. You make it yours. I greatly appreciate the time you have allotted me. I really am excited about joining your team. These are some things that I would be looking forward to doing. And hopefully I've given you enough information that shows that I am the right individual for the job. And so you can do that. Then also you can use this particular time to ask any questions. If during your research you had some questions that you want to have clarified or answered, right now is the time that you can ask those questions. Also, if you're not familiar with their process or you have some questions regarding next steps, you can ask them about next steps at this time. So you can say, what is my next step? What else is it that you need from me? And you go from there. And then as you leave, be sure to thank each one individually using eye contact. So with no further ado, if we have anything, I don't see any other questions that have popped up here. So with that in mind, I want to thank you all for tuning in with me. Be sure to like the page. Be sure to follow me here. I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Instagram. Also be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Dr. Gregory _Salters, where we're taking things. What I want to ultimately do is just help us get from where we are to where we want to be. We have that law enforcement slant. We're going to even be diving deeper into success and leadership. So with that in mind, I am Dr. Gregory A. Salters, and you all have been seasoned for success. You all have a good evening.